Packet Pushers.
Welcome to Packet Protector, a new podcast at the intersection of security and networking from the Packet Pushers. I'm Jennifer J.J. Minella, and I'm here with our own The Drew.
Hey, Drew.
And hi. We also have a guest for you we'll be introducing here in a minute. And remember that we'd love to hear from you. So at any time, go over to packetpushers.net/FU for follow-up and send us a note anytime about topics you'd like to hear. On today's show, we talk about how small IT shops that don't have dedicated security teams can still integrate security into their daily work. Our guest is Joe Stern, VP of IT for a market research company. And before we get into that conversation, let's check out a couple of the news headlines, Drew.
Yeah, so first up, there's some M&M vending machines at the University of Waterloo in Canada. They were examining customers' faces without consent. I guess a sharp-eyed student at the university noticed an error message on the machine saying that the facial recognition app wasn't loading. The student posted about it on social media, and then the student newspaper chased down the story further. The technology is provided by a company called Invenda. Ars Technica then dug into this and got a statement from Invenda. The company says it is not capturing or storing images of people's faces. It's just using software as a person detection function to activate the purchasing interface on the vending machine. Invenda says its software only, quote, approximates basic demographic attributes, end quote, of people using the machine, and Invenda claims full compliance with GDPR privacy laws.
Person detection function as opposed to like the bear coming up and trying to get M&Ms from the vending machine.
Yes, this is weird. Yeah, reading the story just made me wish we could curse on this show because I do have some choice expletives for all the corporations involved in this. Like, first of all, why does vending machine need a camera in it? Why does it need demographic attributes about people, especially when it's a vending machine on a college campus? Like, you know who's going to the vending machine.
Yes.
My understanding of this episode was that the purpose of the facial recognition was to know when somebody had walked away from the machine and said, yeah, I'm not going to buy those M&Ms. And then it would return to the advertising display. It wasn't so much about knowing who was at the machine. I think this one was overblown.
Could be.
But Joe, so you think it's overblown, but what else is that camera catching? So it reminds me a little bit about, well, two things. I think at least in the US and definitely Canada and Europe, we're used to being notified if there's a camera somewhere, right? Like if you're in a public place, well, if you're in a public outside place, you can just assume there's probably cameras. But as soon as you get into a building or facility, we are used to seeing some type of notice that, there's video cameras in use for whatever purposes. But what else could that camera be catching? Because remember when we had all of the who's who listened to what we're saying in our homes, and we had situations where sometimes they were activating and, sending clips of audio that wasn't meant for them, different places. So this makes me a little nervous.
I agree that there could be downstream effects that were never intended to happen. But I think this is more similar to the electric eye that opens the door at the supermarket as you approach with your cart. I don't think it was capturing and saving any other detail.
Well, they said they weren't capturing faces, but they are saying that they are approximating basic demographic attributes, which if it was just the electric eye at the shopping cart, I think that maybe they wouldn't have tried to use that kind of weaselly language. That just raises a red flag for me, that the kind of lawyerly language in the response to Ars Technica.
Yeah, I'm going to stamp this one with sketchy. Definitely privacy sketchy for me.
I suspect it's because they're using an off-the-shelf package instead of customizing it, and that it's included in the feature set. But of all the evils going on, this one is just very lukewarm for me.
Okay. Lukewarm evil for Joe. All right, speaking of evil, in other news, the Lockbit ransomware gang has been taken out by an international coalition of law enforcement agencies. This is according to a story in Wired. The UK National Crime Agency says it has infiltrated the group and taken over its infrastructure, accessed its source code, and seized thousands of domains and servers. So, on the one hand, I think, yay, good. On the other hand, I'm thinking how fast before they're up and running again.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is a very distributed group. They're international. They definitely have a presence here in the U.S. And apparently, it sounds like some of the leadership within that group. And it is interesting because this is one of the groups who has run a very, very professional business-like operation. Mm-hmm. And I believe the person that's at the head of that ship at the helm is very ego-driven and not really ready to give up the identity tied to the ransomware group currently known as Lockbit. So I think it's interesting to see. I think this is going to be like more to come and more to unfold, and let's see how this goes. But definitely, we've seen law enforcement all over the world cracking down on these ransomware groups. The sanctions that are in place, seizing of the assets. I think this is just the beginning, and we're going to be on a big roller coaster ride.
Joe, any comments?
I read yesterday that the Lockbit group resurfaced and said we got taken down because we were going to release all of our findings that we stole from the Fulton County courthouse with salacious details about Donald Trump and his case. Now, I know better than to take them at their word, but I am kind of curious to see how that plays out.
Interesting.
Yeah, and this ransomware group is interesting because it's one of the ones, we've been talking about for a while now, double and triple extortion. So, they're kind of ransomware for hire gang. And they certainly take advantage of these different mechanisms. So if somebody's not willing to pay a ransom, then they extort different ways, which is, okay, they'll start to leak the information to try to force that issue. And if they're still unsuccessful, they might turn and try to sell that information somewhere else. So definitely a big threat.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if law enforcement can actually get people in jail on this. I think that would be maybe somewhat more significant than just temporarily taking down assets.
Sanctions, Drew, sanctions.
Sanctions. Yeah, we know sanctions are so effective. Sorry, too cynical for today. Let's dive into the show. Talking to Joe about integrating security into his everyday IT activities with a small IT team. But before we do it, just to sort of set the table, JJ, you were digging around and you found some kind of alarming stats regarding small and medium sized businesses and the risk environment for them.
I did. And there's stuff coming out, even just daily in this space. So there's, various places, Forbes, Business News Daily, they all have different takes on this in recent months. And, one of the metrics that came out of a recent report was that small businesses with less than 100 employees basically have 3 times more social engineering attacks than employees of larger enterprises and peer groups. And a lot of that's related to phishing. So I don't want to, make it sound like people are, dumpster diving in people's homes and trash to try to pull social engineering stunts. But they are targeted versus, just kind of spaghetti against the wall with the phishing. Other stats that were pretty interesting here, 75% of SMBs could not continue operating if they were hit with ransomware per the business owners. So that's pretty incredible, I think, for just the rest of us in the community who rely on these small businesses, because looking at the spread of companies, I've worked with mid-size up to, Fortune-sized companies, but the truth is the bulk of our community and our economy is small businesses. And so this is really an alarming number to me, that 3/4 are, saying that they could not continue operating when we have so many under attack. I mean, these are, 30, 40, 50% based on numbers, depending on which report you see, as to how many small businesses are under attack each year in the past 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing for us, to consider as just consumers in this space, one of the numbers was that 60% of breached businesses raise their prices after an incident to help cover the expenses related to that. So, a lot of them are going to go out of business and not be able to handle that. They are definitely losing team members and employees and contributors through this because of the stress. And then now we're seeing, price increases for their community after this. So it is impactful to all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just, it's their problem. It has downstream effects. So let's, I wanted to bring Joe in because, he and I know each other and we chat often, and I've got the sense that he has found a way to, really integrate security into sort of the day-to-day IT operations. So Joe, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the business, what you're doing, and how big your IT team is, and how many end users you're supporting, just to give folks some context for the conversation.
Thanks, Drew. And hi, JJ. Well, we have 2 full-time IT people and a junior who helps out for a staff of 80. We are distributed across the country, most of them in the Philadelphia metro, but many not. We've got, we're a professional services company, so we have many clients who have customers of their own, and we help our clients understand their own customer work. Mm-hmm. We are, you could say, the supply chain problem for other people's companies. we are entrusted with their data, and we need to make sure that we don't lose any of it or expose it.
Right. So customers come to you to do market research to help them reach their own customers better. That's sensitive information. So you're dealing with, information that is to your customers very important.
To our customers, very important. Yes.
Yeah.
I think you could create different tiers of how sensitive data is. Some of it is extremely personal and could compromise somebody's financial life or embarrassing medical records. And I feel like we're more in this space that is annoying to lose, like email addresses, phone numbers, but nothing that anybody ever deserves to have made public.
Sure. Yeah. So, looking at a typical week, can you give us a sense of how much time you spend on security versus, other IT tasks, just keeping the business running?
If you think of security as fighting dragons with a sword, it's not that much. But if you think of it as barn chores, it's actually quite a bit. There's a lot of logs to look through. I mean, I have great tooling that tells me whenever leaves are rustling on the forest floor and I need to go look to make sure that this isn't a problem. And so far, it hasn't been a problem. Occasionally, I'll find that a window is left open and I'll close it before anything bad blows in. But there's a lot of time spending just checking logs and looking for things that aren't there, listening for the dogs that are not barking.
And Joe, for the listeners, so you're in an IT role, but security is falling to you and your team of 1.5 people. How did you arrive there? Like, did you come in to a job position understanding it was going to be everything? Have you been there for a while and it was just something that got added after a conversation? What did that look like?
I've grown with the industry. I mean, I've been at this job a long time. And when I first started here, every computer had a publicly routable IP address. And and it wasn't even unusual.
Mhm.
So that's how I've grown into the role. First thing I said at some point was, I'm reading about firewalls. We should have a firewall. And then now I am all about all the well, I guess I'm going to back up and say, for me, security is about keeping the bad stuff out and making sure that the good stuff doesn't leak out.
Mhm.
And those are two separate projects that are both equally important. I couldn't choose one that I love more than another. And another interesting aspect of small business is we don't have a lot of people. Everybody here is kind of a superstar and a high performer and has to be trusted. And where I'm going with this is we can't be too draconian with how we live our lives.
Mhm.
I don't let them be local admins, but I do let them, say, check Gmail on their laptop because I don't expect them to not have their laptop or carry two laptops. And this means I'm in a space that's a little different from some of my more highly regulated compatriots who have very severe rules and PCI requirements that I don't. So
Yeah.
the third thrust for me is making sure that people use their computers safely.
So Joe, a second ago, you were kind of talking, I'm still chuckling on the inside here about the, fighting dragons versus just doing the chores with divvying up security and technology tasks. But it sounds maybe to me like they're not separate tasks for you, that security hygiene is just being baked into your daily routine as part of managing an IT infrastructure. So my question is, would you consider yourself an IT person doing security work at this point, or do you think you're more of a security person who's managing the IT infrastructure?
Oh, I'm a generalist who's doing security for sure.
Nice.
Why would you characterize yourself that way?
Because I feel like security is part of the generalist job. And if I was a security person, it would be inappropriate for me to be resolving a problem on somebody's laptop when the webcam doesn't work in Zoom. But I'm I'm here to help everybody. And part of my responsibility as a shepherd is to keep them safe.
Okay. That's a nice way to think about it.
It is. I think you would be surprised at the number of security professionals that came from a technical background and still like to get their hands dirty and roll up the sleeves and dig into projects. I'm not saying it's always the appropriate thing to do, but it is. You would be in good company if you go that route.
Right.
So let's talk about, so 80-ish people, you said distributed, a little bit of concentration in one area here in the US, and two full-time people and a junior person managing all of that, which I assume is relatively robust because even just juggling, IT resources for 80 people can become a lot. What kinds of security risk are you most worried about? And this might be like a point in time answer, or it might be a general answer. And if you could just kind of qualify that, like what are you thinking and worried about and why?
Yeah, we do this kind of threat modeling all the time and worrying about what could go wrong. The It used to be I was more concerned about ransomware. Like what if the ransomware gangs managed to get software running on my computers and lock them all up and hold our data hostage? But that fear has been eclipsed by fear that somebody is in my network and very slowly, very quietly exfiltrating data to hold over us later and say, if you don't pay us, we're going to tell everybody and release these files on the dark web. That would be a relationship extinguishing event for us and our customers.
Yeah, we call it,
And
yes, resume generating events as well.
and even if I were to protest and say, yeah, that file that they got, all it is people's opinions on a 1 to 7 scale of how much they like lollipops or whatever it is. I don't think it matters to our customer who takes those lollipops very seriously, where
Right. Right.
lollipops obviously is a stand-in for whatever our customers are actually selling to their own customers.
Joe, let me poke into that just a little bit while we're on it, because it sounds like data exfiltration and having somebody persist on the network and maybe trickle that data out is the biggest fear at the moment. So do you have special monitoring? Do you guys, well, I mean, obviously with a staff of, 2.5 people, you certainly can't operate the equivalent of a 24/7,
No,
security operations center where you're monitoring things.
we
How are you guys handling that in an organization of that size?
we do have a managed detection and response partner
Oh,
who
very cool.
has access to all of our EDR logs. And if they see something anomalous, they are authorized to just shut it down.
Hmm.
They have the ability to remotely squelch any computer on my network. I've given
Wow.
them an exception list of like 5 servers they should not do that to, but anything else is fair game. If it's 2 in the morning, I don't need to be woken up to be told that there's a rampant virus infection to say yes. I want it already done. I mean, I
Yeah.
still want to be woken up. I hope they will. Uh, the
So back to the, sorry, I derailed us, but back to the major security risks. You talked about, it used to be ransomware, now it's data exfiltration. Anything else that's tickling your brain at the moment?
I was telling Drew how interested I was in the LastPass affair, where a important password got synchronized to a user's personal Chrome account, Google account, because he was signed into Gmail on his browser, and it said, "Do you want to save this password?" And he just instinctively said yes.
Yes, I actually think that was Okta, but yes,
Is that Okta? Yes, it was. The LastPass was Plex.
yeah.
Correction. The but the principle is, I see that there's a problem with people synchronizing passwords to sensitive things to their personal accounts, which could get popped later. So that is a new concern of mine that I'm actively working on coming up with a fix for.
And so would that separate, and this is a space I don't work in and I'm completely ignorant, but I've seen, of course, vendor pitches and ads for, secure browsing platforms and browsing segmentation. Is that the type of solution suite you're thinking of?
Yes, that is where I'm going with this. There was a sandbox browser that Microsoft Edge offered, but I found it made life unlivable on the modern web. And so
Thank you, Microsoft.
it it was noble, and if I was dealing with nuclear secrets, I would probably have to adopt it, but I'm not. I'm dealing with lollipop preferences.
Lollipops.
They do now make it very simple to have work and personal profiles in the Edge browser, and every new employee that I onboard and I give a laptop to, I simply say, "This is how it is." Where I have some issues are users I've worked with for years who are fully committed to their their Chrome and they're ride or die with it, and they don't want to use different browsers or different profiles. We're coming to an understanding with that. But with the new users, certainly, I set them up with the password vault client in their work browser and get them set up right away with a personal password manager if they don't already have one for their personal profile. And I tell them, you should not want to have your Gmail password, your Netflix password backed up into my cloud. And similarly, all of our work secrets should never be part of your personal password vault. It works really well once you adapt to it. Or that sounded underwhelming. It works well. It's not that hard to do. It's just a life hack that makes managing your personal life very easy on a work computer once you do it.
Do you think end users are responsive to that message of, oh yeah, I probably should want some separation between my work life and my personal life?
Yeah, I hear that, oh, I probably should very frequently. That doesn't always mean that they do it. And I tell them, hey, book an hour with me. I will gladly give you a password glow up because it's good for the company, good for you.
Password glow up. Oh, Joe, I love that.
And you know what? They love it too. When I show them if you ever had to share an Amazon password with someone you live with and they want to buy something, but they need to call you to get the OTP off your phone, like put that in the password manager. You can share it. Or your kid the only time your kid texts you is to say, what's the Netflix password? You can say, I'll just send it to you in the password manager that we use as a family.
Nice. So
I think I wandered away from the question you were asking, though, which is, what am I really worried about? And what I'm worried about is somebody sneaking data out, and how am I going to know if they are? And for that, I'm relying on my firewall vendor, which is monitoring for unusual outbound traffic, especially to command and control websites. The advantage of using the tooling that I am is that all of the information is shared across all of their partners all over the world. So if anybody else ever discovers a CNC site, I'm going to be the beneficiary of that information within seconds.
Right. You mean because your firewall vendor has its own internal research arm that's doing this work and then
exactly
updating firewall rules.
And it's all shared in the cloud. Yep.
Okay. So you mentioned exfiltration as kind of your top risk. How are you worried about them attacking applications, servers, going in through email? What's the entry point that you're most worried about? And then how are you addressing that?
I think statistically, the most likely source of these things is email, probably an OAuth problem, where somebody says, oh, we need you to sign in. Here's put your credentials in this form. And then they get right into your Office 365 tenant. I think that's probably more likely than downloading malware because I've got all kinds of protections running on all the endpoints that would immediately scream if somebody was running new and novel software that wasn't widely known. But an OAuth problem, that one's a little harder to plug. If somebody puts their credentials into a form that requires anything serious, an admin has to approve it. But I guess a lot of bad things could still happen if you gave permission to read all of your email in Office 365. So I get an alert anytime somebody does something new with OAuth. That's a benefit of being a E5 customer with Microsoft. I think it's non-negotiable. It's table stakes. I'm very fortunate as a small business to be able to pay for this E5 because it's expensive.
Yeah, what is E5?
E5 is the top level of security from Microsoft's Office 365 subscriptions.
Okay, so you're paying a premium for security capabilities from Microsoft.
Yes.
Which is kind of ironic given their history, but okay.
Drew, don't be cheeky.
I'm being cynical again.
Well, Joe, I think that's really interesting. And I guess what that tells me, somebody pretty familiar with the Microsoft tiers and the dollar bills that come along with them, is you you obviously work in an organization where the leadership, management, owners, whoever, have bought into security and are taking that seriously if they're willing to budget for that. Is that the case?
It is true. I know for a fact that they care very much and are willing to spend what is necessary to do the job right. And I'm so privileged to be able to say that. I've
That
also never shown them what it would cost if we clip that out of the budget.
yeah. Yeah.
How much
I
they
don't
could
wanna- I
save
don't
if
wanna
you went to an
tempt
E4.
And I get so my question then too is, you've it sounds like been with this organization for a while. Do you have any words of wisdom if you were advising maybe a peer in another organization of your size who didn't have that buy-in already of maybe some, you know, things they could use to persuade their leadership or some levers they could pull? How would you recommend somebody get to that position that you're in now?
It's an economics decision, and as much as we IT people tend to take personal ownership of it, it's really not our call. The there's a cost of rupturing all your relationships because of a security blunder, and I guess you could drive your car without insurance. And I see not paying for proper security tooling as being something similar. It would be very, very expensive if it didn't go exactly right.
Yeah, that's
So
a good way to think about it.
that's one way to put it. I would also say you are not your company. You know, this is it's not personal. As much as I enjoy doing it right, I also know that if I was told I couldn't, it would be I would try not to be too sad about it because it's not my call.
Yeah.
All I can do is give them the right information.
It does make it hard. I know for some people it's a little demoralizing to, you know, to always be kind of slapped on the head or the hand with that when they feel like they're not getting the resources.
Just a brief pause to ask, did you know Packet Pushers has a job board? Whether you're looking to find or fill your next great IT infrastructure role, the Packet Pushers job board is the place to go. It's easy to post, easy to browse, and easy to apply. So whether you've got IT talent or you're looking for IT talent, visit jobs.packetpushers.net and get to work. That's jobs.packetpushers.net.
So Joe, you guys have users, you've talked about, data exfiltration and monitoring services and the value of the firewalls and endpoint protection. But my understanding is you also have, you've got your internal data sets that have to be protected. So there's going to be some, cost and resources associated with that. You have some developers that are doing building internal applications to do your data analysis, and that might also need some protection. So, when you're kind of working through budgets, do you have like a top down or from a protect surface aspect, like, users, data, applications? Do you try to spread the love across all of that from a budgeting perspective?
Some of that is compliance driven. Some of the things that I have to purchase every year are not things that I necessarily think add value, but are checkboxes on a form that I cannot choose not to fill out.
Right.
Yeah, it's a sad state for us all.
Right. The development side does have some expensive tooling that I subscribe to. I'm thinking about external scans that we run against our surface area to look for problems. And of course, I hire a human every year to test us and to try and break in and look at the report and see what they were able to find.
Yeah.
I look forward to that every year to prove myself, and then while it's going on, I just can't wait for it to be over.
I think everybody feels that way about pen testing.
So what value do you get out of a pen test? We've actually had another show about this, but I'm curious to get your perspective because, depending on who you work with, it can be, here's the list of vulnerabilities, go patch them. And other times it's an actual legitimate engagement.
Well, I would consider that former element to be legitimate.
Well, sure, but if they're running the Nessa scanner for you and charging you a pretty penny, that's not
yes.
great.
Yes. When you go to buy a pen test from a service provider, they all give you the exact same sample report that's been sanitized. They all look the same, and it makes you wonder, why does this vendor charge $4,000 and this one charge $25,000 for the same number of IPs?
Right.
And the answer is the kind of probing they're going to do. The cheap one is going to run the Nessus scan, which you can use as a satisfactory obligation meeting. I hired an external pen test, but if you really want to know what the bad guys are going to do to you if they ever decide to give you a second look, then you have to hire the more expensive one. And I do get value. They occasionally find entry points, and almost every time they're not able to capture the flag by the end of the engagement term. If it's an external pen test, that might be getting unauthorized access to some APIs. If it's an internal pen test, that would be getting domain admin.
Uh-huh.
I've been able to stave them off almost every single time. My record was not perfect, but every time I've been able to use the list of things that they saw and use that to do some self-improvement.
Well,
And it's
Joe, you better knock on some wood quick, boy. I'm kidding. I always joke that it's never a failure when a pen tester gets in, because if they're good enough, they absolutely will get in given enough time.
the last one, he was really snarly on the Zoom after action report where he didn't get in. I was really kind of gleeful to see him look so frustrated and miserable.
So, Joe, we talked a little bit about the culture and sort of teaching the users or retraining the users a little bit and programming them to use the separate browsers and to use, personal versus business password manager. So it sounds like you're doing, user awareness training. So I'm curious what the extent of that user awareness training is. Is it formalized? Is it ad hoc? Do you do phishing simulations? What does that look like for you guys?
I think the most important part of it is the monthly phishing test. It's monthly, but it's slightly irregular, so people can't put it in their Outlook calendar to be ready for it. I hire a service that sends the phishing test of the month to all of my users, and it's distributed over 3 days, so it's not like everybody gets it at the exact same moment.
Uh-huh.
And users are instructed, if you see what looks like a phishing message, push the report phish button that's in your mail client. It's on your phone, it's in your browser, it's in your Outlook client. You push that, and if it's the phishing test, you get entered into the contest. So everybody's got an incentive to play along and not just delete it. And then after the campaign is done, there might be one or two clickers. Oftentimes they're new hires who haven't quite gotten the hang of it yet.
Uh-huh.
I send a screen capture of the email and say, what did you notice about this that could tip you off? What are the buttons that it tried to push? I send the same basic email every month, and people write back with their observations about what looked hinky about that email in retrospect. It's funny. I would have expected a message about a new social media policy to have come from our HR person instead of the HR department, which we don't have really.
Uh-huh.
I would have expected it to not to have those weird colors in it, or why were the image links broken if it was really coming from the company. These are all things that if you slow down and look, you would recognize, that looks hinky. And sometimes they also notice why they were impelled to act and overcome their natural caution because of some urgency. Like, you have to click this right away. The invoice is overdue. The thing is going to expire tomorrow. Your mom's in danger. Any of the reasons that a phishing email might say. And so people recognize them. They report them. They get an extra entry in the contest.
Let's talk about the contest. What is the contest?
I get a lot of vendor swag, especially since my title changed. The quality of my swag went up.
You're on the VP
Hey,
level
Joe,
of swag now.
if you just knight yourself as a CISO, you'll be getting all kinds of crazy things.
Oh my gosh, I'll be giving away a week in Tahoe. Yeah, it is appalling the stuff that people give away to try and influence me, or at least get me to notice something, or to do a 30-minute interview.
Hmm.
I also do some because I work for a market research company, I feel a sort of ethical obligation to be a panelist. And so that's a steady source of gift cards. I just, all the swag I get, I just throw into the giveaway pile.
Okay,
And
so the contest is if you correctly identified a phishing email, you could win a gift card or whatever
mhm.
the swag is.
Right. I put everybody's name who either clicked the phishing button or replied to my request for my call for comments into a spreadsheet, and then I let random.org pick a winner.
And something that it sounds like what you're doing is you're not just like running the test and looking at a report and then moving on. You're actually trying to engage folks to ask them, what did you notice about this? What did you get right? What did you get wrong? Like you're actually using it as a teaching tool as opposed to just an automated, you passed, you failed.
Yes, and I will tell you, engagement went way up once I increased the value of the prizes.
I'm sure.
Carrots
Yes, but
over
you're also
sticks.
taking advantage of that engagement to help people to educate people.
Right. I think my phishing test click rates are really low. Low for the industry, low for pure organizations, and it the reporting rates are high, so I know it's not just people aren't seeing it.
Hmm.
People recognize phishing in my company. And
And Joe, I'm going to jump in for the listeners because probably several people know I am personally not a fan of phishing simulation programs for a lot of reasons. But I think when they're done well, and it is a carrot instead of a stick. If you're going to do a phishing program, I think that's the way to do it, and it's just another way to educate the users. And I think the biggest benefit of a program like that is you're helping protect their whole self when they leave the office as well. So, they're less likely to fall for scams sent to their personal emails, sent to LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever social media people the kids
yeah,
are into these days. Like you're really bolstering them for going out into the world and being a more secure person outside of the company as well.
that is so true. It's the whole person that has to be educated, and not just their work self. And I will say, I I like the phishing test because for me, it's a chance to give away prizes. I know that one of our clients has the bad attitude phishing test where if you fail 3 times, you're let go.
Oh,
And
really?
this,
Yeah,
yeah,
that there's no sense in
Wow.
that.
that there's a really sour feeling that comes with that. To the point where if I was on the other end of that, I'd just be clicking that fish button, report fish button on everything. Just to,
Malicious compliance.
yes,
Yeah, and
you
Joe,
can't fire me if I report every email.
and that's what I mean about the carrot, the stick. And I mean, these programs, so I can speak on behalf of many of us in the security space that we would never ever recommend an organization tie HR, punitive HR actions, and terminate an employment based on something like this, unless it was malicious and intentional. Like if there's a user who is intentionally, um, I don't mean intentionally clicking on something, but intentionally putting the organization at risk, that's a different conversation. But the thing with the phishing simulations is, again, there's value when you do it like this and it's positive. Where I think there's not value is in remembering that it doesn't protect us from business email compromise in the way that maybe one of our business partners has had an email account that's been compromised. And so it can not only look like it's coming from a legitimate source, but it actually could be from a legitimate source. So, Drew, if my
Mhm.
if my email was compromised and I email you and Joe, there's nothing there's nothing really to look out for there because I've sent you an email, unless it's just really poorly worded because you guys know I'm OCD. But right, the triggers are a little bit different. And so it doesn't protect us really from that. And any one of us that work in the space, I mean, Joe, I'm sure you feel the same way. If you needed to trick somebody, you could construct a phishing email that would get somebody to click on it, including one of us. So, again, I think there is value, but the whole stick and punishing people for not participating or for participating poorly and not being good, at catching phishing emails, I think is a terrible way to do it. As an educational exercise like you're doing, I think it's fantastic.
We do talk about business email compromise but not in that automated phishing test because, of course, so many of my colleagues never have to pay an invoice. But whenever one of the people on the operations side sends me an email that says, "Do you think this is legitimate?" Because it'll be, "Oh, we have a new a new Swift code number. Please direct future invoices to this." That
Mm-hmm.
immediately goes out to all staff with a, I put on my dad hat and say, "I need you to take a look at this. What would you do if this happened to you?"
Right.
Like, you're not going to call that number below the guy's signature, are you? I talk about it, and I certainly drum it home with the finance team because I think they're the most at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately,
Um,
when you work for a small company, they know everybody.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
true.
think.
But sometimes it's still hard because I mean,
Hmm.
somebody here's a real world example. My prior employer, um, in the company name, there was a lowercase I. Somebody, I don't know who, compromised one of our customers, scraped several different email signatures, created a parallel domain with a domain registered with a lowercase l that looked very much like the I in our company
Uh,
domain,
Mm.
and began a very methodical campaign to several of our customers, trying to get them to pay just what you're describing, right? Pay things, but they had scraped email signatures, they had used real names and email accounts at this, domain that was one letter off, that was almost impossible to tell the difference. So they have gotten really shady.
This is where I have to say you can't rely on the goalie to save every goal. You need
Yeah.
better tooling in front of your email to prevent that from happening. I forget the exact name of it, but there's a computer science principle that will determine how different two strings are, and if there's not enough entropy between them, it will assume that maybe there's something malicious going on. The difference between um, your former employer's domain name and the one with a slightly different character at the beginning, like one of those high ASCII characters that looks like a letter L but isn't.
yeah.
So I've got a mail filter that will definitely recognize that kind of quirky behavior and throw it in front of the analysis before a human ever sees it.
Nice. I want to rewind to one thing, Drew, before we wrap up, and that is
Mm-hmm.
that I think a lot of I don't work in application development space at all, but I know a lot of the CISOs and IT leaders that I'm working with. This is something that most of you guys are dealing with. Um, so when it comes to your in-house developers, I asked earlier about like how do you prioritize the spend and um, related to that. But what are you doing with the developers themselves to educate them or to get them to work in security as part of their process?
Good question. I'm not having come up through modern development techniques and only knowing what I read in the journals. What I do when I meet with the developers in our weekly meeting is I pull up a security article or perhaps one of the latest OWASP rules and say, how does this apply to us? What are we doing to protect against this? Thinking of things like the components that are out of date. How do we know that all of our components are patched and up to date? How do we prevent against insecure deserialization? How do we check that all the APIs do require authentication?
Uh-huh.
It not just trying to take a bite of the elephant at a time and tackle it week by week over the year and trying to shift the security left. I think that's the term, and I'm not misusing it, so that it's
It is,
happening
yes.
in the development phase and not them not counting on me having a rigid perimeter that protects them and bad security practices. And they are thinking about it now, and they're able to use these bite-sized chunks. And this is nice because it's free, because it's just me calling up the right Wikipedia page at the time and talking about it. But I am probably going to hire an external consultant to help us develop our security practice a little more with and formalize it.
Uh-huh. With
I don't think
developers, particularly.
yeah, with the developers in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And I said we got nothing to lose, everything to gain. I don't think it's going to even bring a lot of friction. It should just be doing things the right way and providing artifacts that we care about security that I can show the compliance goblins. Because the AppSec pen testers, they never find anything, but I have a hard time demonstrating that I care about security, like showing reams of documentation that meetings happened or something like that. And I think that we're going to be able to get better at that with a more formal program.
And again, it sounds like the developers, when you're having these conversations with them, are open to this. They don't feel like you're telling them what to do or you're putting onerous expectations on them.
No, none of it's onerous. Sometimes you just have to put the idea in front of it and it's a puzzle for them to solve. And they kind of like that.
Yeah, it's a good way to do it.
We do all love our puzzles, don't we?
Yeah. So maybe to wrap up, I don't know, like you've developed kind of like a very positive culture around security. Do you feel like because you've been there so long and sort of started at the beginning with like, maybe we should have a firewall. Do you feel like you helped shape that culture? But you also said you've got backing from executives around security. How did this culture develop where you're like trying to instruct and educate and not punish folks for doing the right things around security?
Well, I like to think this is my legacy here at the company. Mm-hmm. I'm part of a larger community. I spent a lot of time attending security meetups and hearing other people talk. And I think you will all agree that the cybersecurity community is so collaborative and so quick to help each other. And I went in humble saying, small business, SMB budget, what can we do to do better? I remember the first time somebody suggested not running my domain admin account as my daily driver. And I said, oh, yeah, okay. And they said, yeah, you should really run from privileged access workstations and do all of your admin stuff from there. I said, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And, this was a long time ago. This isn't like a recent revelation for me in case anybody tracks me down. And I try to provide that same sort of helpful guidance to everybody, matching the message to the audience. Obviously, when I do my annual security training for the staff, none of them care about my firewall rules, so I don't talk about that, even as exciting and interesting as they may be. Instead, I'm focusing on what matters to them, and they understand that if we don't keep things secure, none of us get to pay our rent or mortgages. So we're all aiming at the same target. We're all on the same team.
Uh-huh.
And Joe, you brought up something so great that I think is an awesome takeaway from this, if nothing else, for listeners, which is this is such a great community and people do want to help each other, not, poke and burn each other down. And it is great to go find a local ISSA or ISC squared or B-sides, there's so many in every part of not only the regions in the US, but the world where you can, find those people, even if it's just ad hoc and, you find people on LinkedIn and Twitter and you meet up for coffee here and there. And I just want to say thank you because this is I think been a great conversation. You're dealing with so many different layers and things there. And it sounds like you're handling it so gracefully. It's a great model for professionals who are in the need of, building the security program inside of their IT program in a small business without, all of the bells and whistles and resources and kind of smartly making decisions about where you're putting your time and energy. And I think this is going to be really helpful for our listeners.
I'm very glad, happy to help. And I want to give a shout out to the Reddit sysadmin community, which is where I earned most of my stripes, learned most of my stuff.
Are you open to being contacted on LinkedIn if folks want to get in touch with you? Is that a good place to reach you?
Yeah, sure. Happy to.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have that link in the show notes.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of Packet Protector. You can find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you want more nerdy goodness on networking, wireless, cloud, network automation, and more, go to packetpushers.net, where you'll find thousands of hours of free technical podcasts and blogs. See you next time.